When it comes to comparisons, I always find two brands the most interesting to compare, and that is Xiaomi versus Vivo, and that's simply because of their polar opposite approach in terms of mobile photography. So let's find out the difference between the Vivo X300 Pro and of course the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max. Let's dive into the video. For me, when it comes to telling a story of comparisons, the best thing is to have phones with a different contrast in their approach. And arguably, this would be the best. Xiaomi versus Vivo. Leica versus Zeiss. The way that they approach their photography is just night and day. Even more so when you take into account auto photography. So comparison between these two is interesting from that perspective alone. Naturally, when it comes to comparisons, they take in a lot of space. Like a lot of space. But, funny enough, today's sponsor is there to help me out with that. Let's talk about UGREEN and their NAS system. So, storage, as I said, is an important thing for everything I do. Be it all my saved data on my 3D work or be it data on my reviews. Naturally, with the amount of storage that I need, online, it will cost a lot of money. However, with this UGREEN, you get up to 60 TB of storage with no monthly fee. And you can directly connect it to your PC or connect it via your network. And then via that network, you can connect to it anywhere, including with your phone via the app itself. Or use it on your TV to store your favorite TV shows. That won't be removed as soon as the license is revoked. It will simply save you money and gives you space for an affordable price without that monthly bill. And with this UGREEN NAS DH2300, that is a one-time investment that keeps you going. So be sure to check out the UGREEN NAS DH2300 and the other products in the link of the description. Thank you again UGREEN for sponsoring today's video. Time to go back to this comparison. So let's start with the main sensor for both. They're pretty similar. Both have a 50 megapixel sensor, where the Xiaomi has a 23mm equivalent focal length and the Vivo has a 24mm equivalent focal length. Both, however, have the same 1/1.28 inch sensor size. Now, during this comparison, I will mainly stick to authentic mode for Xiaomi and size natural for Vivo without the raw lighting, because we all know what Twitter would be like, showing without context the difference. But if you want an answer on that difference, follow me there, so photographers like you can see the actual difference when it comes to that raw lighting. And I will be making a separate video on that as well, because I feel like it needs attention. Now, what I love about Xiaomi is often their contrast in colors, the moody shots, the dark shadows. This allows a shot to have a good amount of depth in it, further objects truly seen further because of that, combined with the less sharpening that you would normally see. However, I will say Xiaomi has been entering more and more sharpness to the shot itself, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. And I think if you do that, you should have that option that Vivo has, to control the amount of sharpness in the shot. Now, while Vivo really doesn't match the depth of Xiaomi, and in the comparison it looks more bright and more saturated, even more so with greens and blues, they have come a long way, and it's a phone brand I use as main device, simply because I can trust in it. What you cannot really see with the comparison like this is that with Vivo it's been fairly consistent with the shot itself, and overall a more balanced exposure over the entirety of the shot. However, again, raw lighting will change that. low light, however, is where I feel Xiaomi needs to work on the colors a little bit. In the sense that wood colors, for instance, can be a bit dull because of it, and it really doesn't reflect reality that well. But what it still does really well is those exposures. Light sources really have that feel of light sources to it, and that's something that I really like when it comes to Xiaomi and their approach of photography. In terms of difference between these two, when looking at the main sensor, it again really comes down to your personal preference. What do you like better in terms of your shot? Do you like the more exposed shot, the more balanced shot? Then Vivo is something I would advise. When it comes to Xiaomi, you will get more depth and a little bit more character to the shot. But honestly, Vivo has been closing that gap. Zoom shots. There are many ways brands can do this. They can offer different focal lengths or possibly two zoom lenses, with one being a periscope and one a telephoto, for that more natural, delicious round bokeh. However, in this case, both are using that single periscope, but they do have a difference here in their approach. Naturally, as we know, Vivo offers the largest periscope. It's a 200 megapixel resolution combined with an f-stop of 2.7 and a 1/1.4 inch sensor size. Importantly, it's an 85mm equivalent, which basically means a 3.7 times zoom. Where with the Xiaomi we get a 50 megapixel periscope with an f-stop of 2.6 and a smaller but respectable 1/1.95 inch sensor size. But then next to it, again more importantly, a 115mm equivalent, which means a 5 times zoom. This difference is always a bit hard to showcase well, simply because of the different focal lengths. You will get different shots, different compositions. So in cases I will crop into the Vivo shot to get to that same 115mm equivalent to showcase of course how they compare. Naturally I cannot of course go back in range when it comes to the Xiaomi. Now with the Vivo it's a much larger sensor, and if there are subjects you are focusing on, you will get more of that bokeh in the background compared to the Xiaomi, making the subject stand out a little bit more, and also it's a bit more detailed, especially during daytime photography. Low-light photography can be really difficult in terms of colors and the way that they handle it. And colors again fall a bit flat here when it comes to Xiaomi. That strength of color contrast can be a bit inconsistent here, resulting in blending the colors a little bit too much when it comes to Xiaomi. Where with Vivo it tends to be a tad warmer most of the time, and sometimes standing out with being a lot warmer. However, most of the time when it comes to those two, Vivo tends to be a little bit closer to reality. But at the same time, sometimes Xiaomi actually does do it better with the exposures of the shot, like for instance this fountain shot from the side. Sure, they are more rare than common, but it can happen. If I would say something about both of them in low light, is that from time to time Vivo tends to be a little bit too warm, where with Xiaomi it tends to be way too cool and lacks that color contrast that it needs. The ultra wide will allow you to create a wider field of view of the shot, allowing you to create a dramatic shot, or simply have more in the shot of what you want to capture. But again, with phones, this is also where there could be a big difference. Not just the sensor size, but also how wide it is. And in this case here, the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max has a 17mm equivalent versus a 15mm equivalent on the Vivo X300 Pro. Not even very wide on the Vivo, but still a good amount wider than what the Xiaomi really offers here. Next to it, while both have a 15MP resolution, the Xiaomi has an f-stop of 2.4, where the Vivo has a wider f-stop of a 2.0, but also a larger sensor, with it being a 1/2.76 inch sensor size, where on the Xiaomi it's the bit smaller 1/2.88 inch sensor size. So not a big difference here in sensor size, but processing is really going to matter here when it comes to using somewhat smaller sensors. Now, the wideness of the shot is very noticeable, clearly having a wider field of view on the Vivo. Now in daytime they're pretty evenly matched if you ignore that part, especially if you of course look at the full shot and then decide which one you like better. Because as stated before, the profile, their approach is very different. Now, these are pretty extreme conditions in some of these shots, but every now and then you can definitely tell that the Vivo is better at its processing, even with the smaller sensor that it lacks compared to, for instance, the X200 Ultra. However, it will still hurt to a degree in these fairly hard conditions. And the same counts for Xiaomi here, but Vivo does handle the situations a bit better in these low light conditions. Without pixel peeping, I think they can match up pretty decently, but you will see in video that won't be the case, which will be a little bit later on. The world of macro photography is entering a world you would normally not see, close-up details of subjects that you would simply overlook. Now for Xiaomi, you can do this via the periscope for flower shots, but you will notice sometimes it uses the main sensor and then crop in because the periscope doesn't have a great minimum focus distance. With the Xiaomi it's about 35 cm, but with the Vivo it's about 14 cm. That's a bit more than 20 cm of difference. Where with the main sensor, the Xiaomi has a minimum focus distance about 11 cm. But naturally, the effect will be wider than when you use the periscope. So if you are seeing an f-stop of 1.67, it's been taken on the main sensor when it comes to Xiaomi. But you will also see that in the depth of field being far less shallow than what you would get on the Vivo. But when it comes to macro photography, if you want to get really close to the subject, there's no competition. The Vivo just does it far better and more reliably. But when it comes to flower shots, I cannot ignore the beauty that Xiaomi can create, but it also depends a little bit on the color. Portrait shots is still a subject I want to cover more, but naturally as someone with a small social life and being single, it's not an easy task to ask a random person to take a shot of them, especially with how I want to approach it and have some effects in the sky, have lighting hitting them in a certain way that would take a lot of time of their day, and I don't really want to disrupt people that much. But what we know with the Xiaomi 14 and 15 Ultra is that skin colors could be a real issue. But I will say, with the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max, there's actually more life to the skin. It's a bit warmer than reality, sure, but genuinely, it's a lot more pleasing. Yes, both have some softening going on, but I just want to say that I think Xiaomi has taken a good step here in terms of the skin colors. Though the edge detection can be quite harsh, but with the Vivo, that cutout is more natural. I will also say, taking a shot of yourself with the Xiaomi is a lot easier. Okay, 60 frames per second on both the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max and the Vivo X300 Pro. Starting with the main sensor, you can see like the lovely contrast the Xiaomi has, at least on the screen itself. It looks like there's a lot of more depth to the shot on video. So right. Then we have a periscope that is 5 times, which is 115mm versus 85mm, which is 3.7 times. I can crop in a little bit more. Let's make it 115mm on it as well for the Vivo, so you can see the difference. Again, on the phone itself, it definitely looks like there's a lot more contrast on the Xiaomi compared to what we get on the Vivo. Of course, you can tap and then lower the brightness. That could help, but yeah, definitely by default, the Xiaomi does that better in my opinion, but that's preference, of course. Front-facing camera on both the Vivo X300 Pro and Xiaomi 17 Pro Max. Skin color looks really odd on the Xiaomi, definitely better on the Vivo, and exposure in the background, they shift a little bit. It started better with the Xiaomi, but now it's better with the Vivo. You can see like the branches are losing details because of exposure problems. Of course, it can go to 25mm, but with the Xiaomi there isn't like a focal length difference change like as in buttons. Alright, let's try this again. Yeah, now it definitely works on the Xiaomi as well. So 4K 60 frames per second, portrait video. Yeah, it looks quite noisy on the Xiaomi in comparison to what I have on the Vivo, but the Vivo looks a bit unnatural as well when it comes to the image. Like, I'm not necessarily liking either of them, but if I would choose, it would be in between. Low light, 4K 60 frames per second on the X300 Pro and the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max. Not right. Main sensor and periscope versus periscope. Initially it's a 5 times, so let's do 115 on that as well. Definitely the Xiaomi looks a lot worse in comparison to the X300 Pro, at least on the phone itself. And the ultra wide doesn't even look close on the phone. It's like a different class. Front 4K 60 frames per second. Definitely Xiaomi looks a lot softer, less detailed as well than the Vivo. Lighting is not as well. So the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max versus the Vivo X300 Pro is a very interesting concept in terms of comparison, again because of their difference in terms of approach. Realistically, if you look from a technical standpoint, there is no way that the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max can compete, especially with the supporting sensors that are simply much better on the Vivo X300 Pro. That being said, nonetheless, when it comes to the style, the approach and so on, there you can have a real conversation. It's just when you look at the technical side of it, there's very little conversation to be had when it comes to a comparison like this where the Vivo simply wins. Naturally, when it comes to the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max, there is a conversation to be had when it comes to that weird display. That weird display, if you are a content creator, allows you to frame yourself properly in a high quality. Naturally also we have to discuss that the audio that comes from it so far isn't the greatest, so that definitely needs work if you want to use the onboard audio, or microphone in this case, for recording yourself. But I think that's an interesting part in the conversation as well. If you love creating content and you want to be able to see yourself, the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max does allow you to do so, which I've done a long time with my Mi 11 Ultra simply because of that, even though it didn't provide the best video quality because of the saturation and the general look of the video. It really helped me with framing myself, and this one this one evolves on that and makes it a lot easier and better to frame yourself properly. But when we look from the technical point of view, there is really no way that the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max competes with what the Vivo X300 Pro offers, especially when it comes to the periscope inside of it. This is a huge sensor that is really good for photography and videography that sadly the Xiaomi just cannot compete with properly. Either way, what did you think about the comparison between this Xiaomi 17 Pro Max and Vivo X300 Pro? Let me know in the comments below. Either way, before we leave, I really want to thank UGREEN for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate it. And of course, if you are interested in UGREEN, be sure to check the link in the description and of course on the pinned comment where you can check out their latest products. It's really helpful for a content creator like me to have access to it everywhere I can. And of course with their app on my mobile phone, maybe on your laptop and so on. And have of course that quick access to several files. Not to mention that the extra storage is definitely helpful. And naturally, it also helps that you don't have to pay monthly for it. It's just there. Either way, before we leave, I really want to thank my members. Thank you so much for the support you guys have been giving me. It really means the world to me. And of course, if you want to become a member, you can by clicking join below. And of course, for my members, WAV files will be available between the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max and of course the Vivo X300 Pro, so you can check those files out for your personal use. Either way, I do really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like again and subscribe and so on. The things that YouTube wants you to do. And of course, talk to you guys in the next.